United Kingdom is trillions in debt. If Scotland gets independence, how much would Scotland have to pay towards that debt?
Okay, thank you.
3 questions, please. Next question. Madam.
Based on how much taxes that Scotland pays into the UK and how much taxes are spent on the military, how much does Scotland pay towards the military currently?
Good. 3rd question. Oh, Leith's only shy, come on. Madam.
Well, we're just over from New Zealand this week, and what people in New Zealand and small countries cannot understand is, what do the Scottish people know? The majority of those that say they don't know believe they are unable to have a stable, sovereign society like New Zealand, Luxembourg, Denmark. They say one of the things, the smallest country in Latin America is Uruguay. It's also the most prosperous country in Uruguay. So as small countries are looking and saying, what's this feeling that's so many people ready for the rest of it?
I think that's a very good point, Madam. I might ask the lady behind you to ask the question as well, that we can take for it once.
I just spent 20 years away from Scotland, and I've come back. And I've been in a lot of countries, in Poland, Denmark, and France, and Switzerland, and mainly in London. And my first impression coming back here is the roads are terrible. Food bags. Roads in Poland are better than they are in Scotland. I mean, I didn't really aware of how bad they are. So we're all used to it. That's just something else.
Very fair point. An interesting range of questions there. Should I ask Tasmina to lead on with the debt question?
Yes, I thank you very much indeed for your question. Yes, we are indeed in debt, leaning towards now £1.5 trillion. I should say that an independent Scotland or a devolved Scottish Parliament has not been responsible for that UK debt that has come to pass as a result of successive Westminster governments. But it's also important to say that Scotland is already contributing to paying off that debt at Westminster. We're paying our fair share of that debt, and that will continue post-independence. In terms of the figures, it's estimated at about £5 billion per year for, say, the next 10 years or so, depending on the level of that finalised debt. So we are already paying for that debt. What I will say is that debt, once we share fairly and equally our assets and liabilities after negotiations, we'll be a better place to pay that debt, because we'll be able to prioritise what we do with our income. And that means we'll not be spending £1 billion on renewing weapons, or 100 billion, renewing weapons of mass destruction, but spending that money on our people. And also, we're already contributing more tax per head to the UK Treasury than per head than the UK as a whole in every one of the last 33 years. So let there be no doubt we can absolutely afford to look after ourselves, pay our bills, but certainly with independence we'll look after more of our people to make sure we create the society that all of us want to live in.
Would you like to respond to a few of the points, sir?
Yeah, could I duck the one about the roads? Because I'm not sure I know anything about roads. The thing that struck me on the debt, it's okay, I'll just answer to leave others to do the hard ones. On the debts, I agree with Tashmina. When we get a yes vote, we've got to negotiate with the British state, don't we? And we're very fortunate in Scotland that lots and lots of other countries have had their independence from the British Empire over the last 50 or 60 years, and we see the way the British state and the ruling classes treat those countries, and it's not very good. You can't trust them. You can't trust a thing they say. And my attitude will be, we're Scottish, we're reasonable, we'll take on those debts that are ours. We'll pay our debts because that's the reasonable thing to do. But we're not going to take on any debts that aren't ours. And secondly, as my good colleague and friend and part of the Yes Scotland coalition, Jim Sillars, points out, in recent years, the Bank of England and the government of Westminster have been involved in something called quantitative easing, where they're pouring billions and billions and billions and billions of pounds into the British economy, where the government lends money to the Bank of England and the Bank of England lends it back to them. And if they say that's debt, that's fictitious money. You owe yourself some money. I paid myself some money. And I think the trap we have to watch is they don't say, Tashmina, Colin, Alan, could you pay have some of that quantitative easing debt too, because it's fictitious. And I'm bloody sure we're not going to pay fictitious debts. So we weren't born yesterday, and I don't trust them. And I look forward to our negotiators being wise to that and learning from other countries. But if I can say this on the question that the woman asked about defence, the sad truth of the matter is Scotland and the people of Scotland have paid an absolutely appalling, terrible price for being part of the British Empire. We have a very militarised society. You're perhaps not aware of it. But the only volume manufacturing left in Scotland is related to defence and killing people. In the Ferry Road in Edinburgh, British Aerospace, Marconi, GEC, Ferranti, they make weapons systems. That's not what I want to see in an independent Scotland. And I agree with the Scottish Government's white paper that after we have independence, we will have an army, or a navy, or an air force. We have something called a Scottish Defence Force. And the emphasis will be on defence. We'll defend ourselves. By Christ, we'll defend ourselves if we need to. We're able to, and we will. But we'll not go attacking people who have done nothing to us. We'll not go invading countries like Iraq. We'll not go occupying We'll not go telling the rest of the world and in Scotland, I want to see is a totally different Scotland from the one today. I missed the Commonwealth Games, Alan, but I understand that Hamish Henderson's Freedom Come All Ye was sang at the Commonwealth Games in Glasgow, which is a wonderful, wonderful anthem, and it belongs to us and the independence movement. Hamish was a proud supporter of independence and a republic. And he wrote, and you heard it in the Freedom Come All Ye, where he talks about laddies and lassies, wains, standing in the banks of the Broom of Law, crying because their brothers, their fathers, their uncles were sailing away to war. And unfortunately, we have inherited the truth that the skirl of the bagpipes and the sight of the tartan in far too many places in the world is synonymous with oppression, with tanks in their countries, with fear and loathing, and we have to rectify that, and we will.
Yeah, I can probably make my voice as loud as Colin's, but I'll use the mic. Just on, I'll carry on my thoughts on how much we pay towards the military. The short answer to the question you asked is I haven't a clue. And I have to say I'm a wee bit fed up, not with your question, but by the no side's absolute obsession with the detail and the minutiae. And that's not to say it's not important, but it's lift our eyes, lift our sights. I come from a rural community where when I was growing up, and it's no different now, you either went to university, you went into the bank, and that avenue's gone, or you went to the military, you went to the armed forces. Working class, urban communities like Leith are no different. They are recruitment grounds for our armed forces. I want better choices, better life chances and opportunities for working class kids all across Scotland, so that the armed forces is not a get out at all, because that's how it's been seen, the chance of a decent career. I want to end that culture, and that's what independence offers us, exactly as Colin says, by creating a defence force, a different culture, a different approach to militarisation, then we actually get away from it being seen as an attractive option for far too many young people. To come to the small countries point, couldn't agree more. There's a reason why women in countries like Norway, Denmark and Finland actually say that they have hugely satisfying lives, that they live with equal pay, they live in a fairer society, they have much better life satisfaction all around, and that is because small countries do make better decisions for their populations, and they are much more likely to treat all their population fairly and equally, and not do the dividing rule that we suffer from under the UK system. So, small countries have plenty to teach us, and if you look at the statistic that we would be the 14th richest country in the world, 10 of the 13 nations above us are small countries the same size or smaller. And that is because they do make better decisions. They can respond to financial crises much more nimbly. They have fewer people to focus their resources and efforts on, and they just make better decisions. To come to the lady's point about the roads being terrible, well, they're particularly bad in Edinburgh, it has to be said. There are some areas where they're better. But I think the bigger point of all of that is, at the moment, we get handed a bag of pocket money from Westminster and basically told not to spend it all in the one shop. There are certain things we're allowed to spend it on. In the next 2 years, that bag of pocket money is going to get smaller. There's £5 billion coming out of the £33 billion block grant, and that has to be eked out across all the services that we are currently responsible for. And while there are councils who make bad decisions and sometimes they make good decisions, the state of our roads is an example of one as only having a certain amount of money available to us and as having to kind of stretch it so far, and that's going to get worse in the next few years because of the impact of austerity in our block grant. And the second point about it is we have no opportunity to raise income of our own. We have to just spend. We don't have anything to go. So if we wanted to improve our roads, we couldn't.
I'll be really quick because I want to hear more things from you guys as well. But firstly, on the debt side of things, I think Tasmin has pretty much covered it. But it's important to remember on the debts that we've got assets that we pay towards as well. So not only do we pay our fair share at the moment and would continue to do so, but we've also paid towards some shared assets. Robin McAlpine quite often talks about how many tube stops in London we might be entitled to in the split up after a yes vote. I'll swap mics, that one's not so good. But we should contribute towards assets as well. So I think actually the debt point and the worries about it are maybe a bit of a moot point. On defence, again, I'm really sorry, I don't know the exact figures of how much we spend at the moment on defence, but I do know that it's more than what we spend on international development, and it's more than what we spend on energy security, for example. As a Green, I'm a pacifist, I don't believe in huge amounts of spending on defence. And I think actually the biggest threats to Scotland, to an independent Scotland in the 21st century, are not terrorist states, they're not nuclear powers, of nuclear states in far-flung parts of the world. They are things like energy security and climate change. That's what's going to threaten the security of our country. And the fact that we are looking at taking every last drop of oil out of the North Sea, I think that is a bigger threat than some of the things that we are spending money on Trident for. So that's what I say about defence. And finally, on your point about the roads, we'll tackle that one because I'm a Leither, I stay in Great Junction Street, and the roads are mints. I'm a cyclist, and I'm so glad that Leith Walk is finally being addressed because there's so many times I've nearly come off my bike on there. I think actually the problem with the roads that we see in Scotland is not the fact that we are rubbish at managing our own affairs, but it's the fact that we have actually quite a centralising economy. We don't trust local authorities to spend money on looking after roads. We don't allow them to raise their own taxes to the point where they could look after roads if they wanted to. But I think there's probably broader things to say on transport, that actually if public transport was better and more affordable, if not free, I think that would actually take a lot of the demand off the roads and mean that we would do a better job of looking after them. And if we made it easier and safer to take alternatives like cycling, like walking, instead of having to take the car everywhere, that would also make our roads in a better state. But I think fundamentally it's about having the power to make those choices, and we don't have all of those powers right now.